Good evening, Robert Scribbler. It is September 10th, 2018. Thank you for joining me for another climate change and clean energy video blog. Now, for this segment, I am going to provide for you an update on Hurricane Florence based on reports from the National Weather Service and the National Hurricane Center, as well as providing you a bit of climate context for what is shaping up to be what looks like a very severe strike for the U.S. East Coast, particularly for interests in the Carolinas and especially in North Carolina. And what might be the worst landfalling event in the last 30 years or possibly the last 50 years. It's worth noting that Florence right now, according to the National Hurricane Center, possesses maximum sustained winds of 140 miles an hour. Is a minimum central pressure of 939 millibars and is tracking off to the west-northwest at around 13 miles per hour. The storm presents a very serious threat to coastal areas as a feature that is likely to produce very severe storm surge flooding and strong winds at the time of landfall, which is now projected to be sometime late Thursday or Friday on its present expected course and at its present expected forward speed. Now, it's worth noting that the storm, in addition to producing very severe potential for storm surge flooding near its point of landfall and to the north, is also now projected to produce very severe rainfall as well, at least according to present weather models, with many models showing in excess of 6 to as much as 15 to 20 inches of rainfall in some locations in this National Hurricane Center model, and some models showing in excess of 30 inches of rainfall for some locations. It's also worth noting that the projected path of Florence in the consensus model, or for the model consensus from the National Hurricane Center, has shifted a bit to the north, moving a little bit to the north of Wilmington. So between the southern Outer Banks and Wilmington right now as a projected strike for landfall, shifting a bit away from the North Carolina, South Carolina border region and Wilmington. Now, these models have wagged a bit to the north, a bit to the south over the past couple of days, but the consensus has been pretty solid so far. And this is a very dangerous situation, particularly for the coastal regions of North Carolina, directly in the path of this storm, as well as regions to the north, especially the southern Outer Banks. And I encourage you to go to the National Hurricane Center website and read the most recent updated information. Now, it's also worth noting that the time at which tropical storm force winds are projected to cross the coastline in the Carolinas, particularly in North Carolina, are early morning Thursday. And so people should be well away from coastal regions well before that time, as coastal flooding tends to precede the landfall of the storm and may make it difficult to leave the coast prior to the storm's landfall. So it's good that evacuation orders are being issued at this time so that people can prepare and get out of harm's way. Now, as far as some climate change related features that are providing some extra kick to Florence, it's worth noting that sea surface temperatures off the eastern seaboard of the United States are much warmer than normal, in the range of about 1.5 degrees Celsius to 3.8 degrees Celsius to, in some cases, more than 5 degrees Celsius above normal. These are very warm sea surface temperatures that are enabling Florence to maintain such a high intensity as it approaches land. It's not really typical that you would see such a strong storm able to strike so far north. And it's also worth noting that some of the models, some of the intensity models at this time, show the potential for Florence to achieve Category 5 status over the next couple of days prior to making landfall. But most of the models are showing the highest potential for Florence making landfall as a Category 4 storm, which has very severe extreme impacts. But these models showing the potential for Florence to hit Category 5 status over the next couple of days as it approaches the coast is a serious concern. It's also worth noting that atmospheric water vapor is very high over the region. I'm just going to show you the precipitable moisture levels. So there is a trough draped over Texas, some of the Gulf Coast states, and parts of the eastern United States at this time. And there has been a tropical moisture flow off of these very warm sea surfaces into the southeast. This moisture overriding both the southeast and this section of the Atlantic Ocean through which Florence is projected to move will also tend to provide fuel for the storm. It's also worth noting that the atmospheric models do show very little in the way of wind shear, which would help to tamp down the strength of the storm. So there's very little that's limiting the potential strength of this storm. So it's a rather dangerous situation for those along the coast. I am presently in Garden City Beach, South Carolina, and the governor here has issued an evacuation order for noon tomorrow. So large sections of the coast under the gun of Florence, and particularly those in North Carolina, especially along the present projected path and in the cone in which Florence is likely to strike, need to pay attention to local emergency management authorities. This is a very serious situation. Thank you for joining me, and I'll be chatting with you soon.